I have the great joy and pleasure of being here with Aditi Sethi, who is a colleague of mine, a woman I admire greatly, and a great teacher just by who she is and how she is in the world and the work that she does. And Aditi is also one of the protagonists, I would say, of the documentary, The Last Ecstatic Days, with which we've been going on a pilot tour in Mexico and continue on this journey of building bridges and making connections and learning together about this work that we are doing, whether we are doing it together or individually, but collectively for a greater good and for the evolution of our deaf culture. We are here to just talk more about the potential of this work, about the mission that brings us to this work, or how we stumble upon that mission, and what it inspires in us, because those of us who have worked closely with the dying and those who hold the space for them discover that that is an incredible space of healing and transformation, both for the people who are more directly impacted, but for all of us who are somehow part of this incredible journey. And so welcome, Aditi.
Oh, thank you so much, Wilka. It's lovely to see you and to hear you reflect on this journey we're on.
So I guess, Aditi, maybe you can tell us a little bit about just, how you might give words to how you came into this role of holding space and companioning and that transformation from medical doctor to doula. And just maybe, what was sparking you? I don't know what the words are. You tell us, please.
In relation to Ethan and the Ethan journey, perhaps?
I guess so. I don't know where it started. Where did it start for you? Was it there?
Well, my journey with end of life care started when I was a teenager, and I was an Indian American, born in India, raised in the South in America, in Georgia, and very confused about my identity, my path in this life. What am I doing here? Who am I? Is having the American dream the ideal? Is that why we're here? To accumulate and to be successful and all these things. So when and then going back to India and seeing the richness of the culture, including the poverty and the grief and the sadness and the death and the suffering, but also with the beautiful music and the food and the richness of the culture, and just coming back to the States where everything was hidden and kind of manicured and just very confused. And then when I walked into a volunteer fair in my college and there was a hospice booth set up, the woman lovingly invited me over and said, "Hey, let me tell you about hospice." And something in my being resonated so deeply with the fact that we're going to die and that nobody was talking about it even then. So I'm 42 now, almost 43. So that's when it started. And my experiences at the bedside as a volunteer really stayed with me throughout my medical training as an allopathic medical doctor. So I did family medicine training, but I was sort of in the role of an observer, watching and seeing how is it that we approach death, or how is it that we don't approach death, and how much fear. I witnessed so much fear in the medical community around death, and so much avoidance of the conversation around death. So I remember in residency training once, this gentleman was in the ICU having his 7th surgery, and the surgeon told me he's going to die anyway. So I don't know the point in this. And I said, why are we doing it? And he didn't have an answer. Just like this assumption that everybody wants everything done at all costs till the very end. And so these experiences guided me through my medical training. And then I specialized in hospice palliative medicine and worked in an inpatient hospice facility for 10 years, which was an incredible gift. And I saw these gaps and these ways in which we weren't fully, as a culture, as a community, upstream of an illness or critical crisis, event or critical event, that we weren't really engaging in this conversation. And so that's where me stepping into this activist role and becoming a doula and really looking at how death is not a medical event and how can I support people in a non-medical way to start contemplating death, preparing for death, And then what that did for my own personal journey was profound. It helped me really connect with parts of myself that I may have quieted along the way just because of this demands of the medical system, the paperwork and the practical and all the things. So meeting Ethan, I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I can pause there.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, of course, and I love to hear that more in-depth story about how we get here, because when people ask me, how did I get into this work? I think it probably, I mean, if we keep tracing it back, at least I can trace it back probably to the conditions of my conception to begin with. That existential question begins very, very early. And then as we begin to take form within the culture that we're born and within the systems that we're born into and everything, then the question for some of us becomes louder, right? And if we are touched by death in one way or another early on, or we're aware that we've been touched by death early on, or loss, or some big change, then for some of us, these questions only get louder. And so I love to hear that. And then the other thing I was wondering about, because the way I understand it, this calling that we share and this mission that comes from it is something that springs forth naturally, and that is not, to me, it's outside the system. It's just part of being human. I was doing doula work and I was doing grief work without knowing anything about it, without having been trained, without having been, having read anything about it specifically, right? Since I was a teenager, right? And for some of us, life circumstances bring us there in different ways and build on the experience that prepares us, right? We're talking about, are we ready? Are we ever ready, right? But life prepares us for certain things. And so, when I think about nowadays, we have to create a structure that will support something that is innate and inherent to us, but that now needs to be somehow, room needs to be made for it in a system, right? So now we have to give it a name, and now we have to have specific sort of, I don't know, a specific identity and a specific role and specific protocols and things that we can do as a person who is a human who cares about our grieving and our dying. So I appreciate that very much. And I just have a very practical question. Did you actually train as a doula at any point? Because I was doing that work, but then it was later that I discovered that such a thing existed. And then I did a training just to sort of feel official about what I was already doing. So I'm wondering how that went for you.
Yeah. So one of the things I realized, yes, I did a formal training eventually, but I was doing a lot of the similar practices at the bedside, as I was able with the time constraints, but I did a doula training and through the Conscious Dying Institute. They came to Asheville and they actually used the space in our room, an event space that they rented it out. So I was right there. And so I just walked in, I did the class. And I think what it helped me, it was sort of a remembrance, being in that space with like-minded, heart-centered, spirit-centered people. It was just a lovely reminder, a loving reminder of why I started this work to begin with. And it helped me kind of deepen in the work, I would say. But to me, these skills are basic human skills, like you're speaking to. They are innate, and we just have to remember that and not allow conditioning to change our perception or to change our understanding of that. And in our country, death has moved so far away from the home and from the community. It's really handed over to medical professionals. And hospice has come a long way as an organization and as now a medical offering to support families to help their loved ones in their homes, but they're still not given that 24/7 support and that really personalized support. So that's what I think this movement that we're stepping into, it offers kind of an empowerment of community and family to come together and really support one another. Again, as it's so old, it looks new, kind of.
Yes. Yeah, I like to think that in a way we are sort of reawakening and recovering and rescuing certain things that we have forgotten or been disconnected from. But there's also something else that is happening that can only happen now that couldn't happen before. Yeah. So it's another way that, you know, I think a lot of our work has a lot of bridging, I don't know, for lack of a better term, in sort of rescuing something, bringing in the things that we have now, because we've created problems that we didn't have before, or you know, the consequences of where we're at, right?
Exactly. I often, that comes to me a lot, and I bring it up a lot in our community that we are meant to be bridges, and we're not meant to just create an alternative and run with it and just serve like-minded people. We're actually here, and my sense of it is we are meant to bridge between the medical and the communal, if you will, and the um, spiritual and the scientific. I think we're really in a place of wanting to come together to really have the biggest impact on many things, because this is not just about, what I realized too, is it's not just about bedside care. This is also
Mm-hmm.
about our relationships with one another, our relationships to Mother Earth. It's about relationship to spirit. It's about, there are so many layers here that I didn't realize when I was just being a medical physician in hospice care. Like the scope of what we're talking about and the impact of what we're talking about on our individual souls as well as our collective consciousness. So it's good
Yes.
stuff.
Yes. To me, that is so exciting. You know, when I was speaking with Scott in the little conversation we had for these purposes, he was saying, well, you know, if I may say, and he was, you know, sort of not like saying it really out loud, but he was saying it. He's like, you know, this is a revolution. And I'm saying, yes, it's absolutely, this is a revolution. This is, as you said, it's activism. It's defending something. It's protecting something. It's recovering something or rescuing something. And I think it's really interesting, and I would like to talk more about this, because when I started more officially doing this work, and then I realized I couldn't do it alone, and in fact, I was calling in the help of whoever was there, and then sort of intuitively understanding the roles that each person who was present could take. And just, there's something organic that happens around the aura of a dying person. And I mean, it's like a whole environment that sort of emerges and that calls in, and there's some sort of like an orbiting that starts to happen. I don't know, sort of this gravitational pull toward what is needed in that space. And so I observed that, and that's what led me to understand that this is something that is meant to be done in community and in groups, in circle. And that led me to the trainings that we do here, and to, wanting to work in community and have a team of people and all these things. But what I think is even more interesting, that excites me so much, is that in following this path and in my own sort of impulse and conviction that this is work that we are doing collectively, even if we're not aware of it. And when you and I met, I said this to you, it's like, we're already working together. We just didn't know it until now that we recognize each other, right? And I've been doing this, and anytime I identify that someone else is doing this work, I go and say, we're doing this work together. Remember that we're doing this work together. And so I've been doing this of trying to connect with the people, the tapestry that holds and lifts this work actively since 2020. And then as I watch this film over and over, and as I am, translating and listening, and, it's like this very interesting intimacy with the documentary, right? And in a way, the people in it. I start to notice more of that web of connection of all of us who are doing this work. And therefore, this work also reveals more of that global collective community that is being called to usher this new era, not just in our end of life care and in our grief care, but in our, as you said, in the well-being of our humanity, the well-being of our planet. I told Scott we need to do another program that is like 6 degrees of separation in this work,
Yeah, that's amazing.
you know?
That's so beautiful. Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what I've noticed so the documentary captures an experience so beautifully and artistically, artfully. Um, and it's amazing to think of the medium of film and documentary filmmaking as a tool to really engage in this conversation and to connect us all in our shared humanity, you know? And I feel into that when I see the film too, in different groups. You know, it just premiered at the Santa Fe International Film Festival, which was so profound. And meanwhile, you were doing your pilot tour, and I just could feel into the web and the mycelial connections and networks that are there and have been there, but we just didn't, we just hadn't realized it yet at the time um, of the film for sure. But yeah, it's just a beautiful thing. And that's something I got really strong, loud and clear during, I call it the Ethan journey because it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life, on many levels. But one of the things I was intuiting was just it's time. It's time for us to not be so siloed. It's time for us not to let go of that idea that one person is the leader in this, because this is death we're talking about. This is bigger than all any one person, right? Any one
Mhm.
one, uh, one person identity. So I just think it's really awesome that we're connecting, and I'm grateful that you're following it too, following the river, the thread.
Well, anything that, at least for my team and for me, anything that we can do to support one another as we are lifting this work and sort of evolving with it, is for me, is a duty, right? Like this has to be done, and those of us who have the energy and the passion for it, I mean, I can't not do it, And
Okay.
so something that also felt really beautiful was, as you said, as you were inaugurating, or whatever the word is, in Santa Fe, and we were in our little pilot tour here, it just kept feeling like things kept lighting up, and it was almost like there was this consciousness that was palpable that was being raised, if
Mm.
that makes sense, right? And so I know that we are doing this, right? And so I mean, I trust it deeply. So yeah, anything that we can do to work together.
Yeah, and just the magic of, like, when you talk about 6 degrees, the fact that your dear friend is a dear friend of mine and she lives in Asheville now, and all these intersections in our lives. It's fun to reflect on. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it's super wild. So so I've been posting some stories of the tour that we did and all these things, and so somebody who, I mean, to me, I have mixed feelings about all this thing about being followed and like getting,
Mm.
whatever, but I also understand that it can be a tool for uncovering again and discovering who is part of this community, this global community who's doing this work. And so for that reason, I find that it can be a useful resource. And so it continues to prove itself to me. So I'm like, okay, I don't have to be resistant to it. For a long time, I was very resistant to it. Somebody reached out to me to say, that's so great that you are, thanking the film. And this woman worked with Ethan for 6 months before, somehow before he went to North Carolina. I'm not sure the story of that trajectory. She said, Ethan used to live in Ithaca. I used to live in Ithaca.
Mm.
And so I say to her, I used to live in Ithaca. And she said, actually, we met. So, so this woman
Mm.
used to be the museum photographer when I was photography faculty at Cornell University
Oh my gosh.
between 2003 and 2009, more or less. So, so she and I met within this other realm of photography, and now she's an end of life doula, and I'm an end of life doula, and she worked with Ethan, and in some way I'm working with Ethan, you know.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
So wild. And then I shared about this work because I had to ¿cómo se dice? Postpone a dream circle. I do dream circles online with students I've had for years, and one of my groups is a Brazilian group. So we have our dream group in Portuguese. And so one of the people in that group, I had to, you know, postpone our session because we were on tour. So I told them, and she said to me, you know, Ethan was a dear friend of my daughter. It's like, what? So the more that we are actively sort of connecting through this work, the more we realize we're connected. So I would like to sort of simplify that realization to say the more we connect with death, the more we are connected with life, the web of life.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Amazing. I love that. And that's how it is. That when I say it was transformative, it was that what you just described, like undeniable flow, and whether you want to call it synchronicity or just interconnection, undeniable unity consciousness, whatever you want to say, that's what I experienced in those 2 weeks I knew Ethan. And what it has, the ripple effect of that journey, I call it, is what you're seeing now, is this, like, you know, these deepening of relationships and expanding of the work that we're called to do in a very collaborative, connected way. It's beautiful.
Yes, yes. The other thing that I think is beautiful about this experience, that includes the film, but it's not just about the film, is that, but the film does a great service to this truth, is that, number one, our dying belongs to all of us, that we are touched by every person's death, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we even know that somebody died or not. There is a constant flux and flow of the human sort of collective consciousness that is happening through our birthing and our dying. And that sort of the impact that a death can have and the dying process can have, the movie shows it undeniably. The lives of those who were touched by that particular scenario is undeniable, right? But it also demonstrates that that is what is always happening and we are just not connecting with it, right? So, you know, we talk about how, oh, we want to have our life have an impact. Our dying has powerful, incredible, transformative, healing impact. And so every time that I show the film, you know, I am so deeply grateful to Ethan and every person who is dying. You know, in our case, we get to see this very special and unique space and allow that to touch us and to continue to touch us. But this is happening all the time and we're missing out on it.
Yeah, and you know, some of when I mentioned those early days of witnessing how death was being addressed or handled, if you will, some of the closest people I loved and knew died very medicalized deaths. And they were in their 50s and they had cancer and they had children. So I understood it. And yet they did things they knew it was futile to do what they were doing, but they did it for their family. And I don't know if that really served long term, the big picture. It may feel like you're doing everything and fighting the battle till the end, but is that really, is that the way? I don't know. It seems like it has more detrimental effects long term if you're not able to be held and to love and to offer the ritual and ceremony that the loved one may have wanted. If you're not given that invitation, or if you don't know that there's another way, then you fall into the medicalized way of dying, which is very common. Even in the modern world, even in, like, people say, oh, India must be so different. What we're finding is, what I'm hearing is that in India too, if you have means, you're going to die in a hospital, because that's the ideal, you know. You have access to it. So anyway, just some things to consider, things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, and the dying that whom I have worked with whom I've worked, um, have reflected some of that to us in terms of how the interventions at a certain point no longer serve and diminish the quality of life, diminish the capacity for connection, and also generate more suffering. They also generate more conflict, or can. I'm not saying it's always that way, but you know, the feedback we've gotten on the stories that we've held and listened to, we've had I think it's a great honor and a privilege to work with people who have chosen, or that this, you know, it's more culturally accepted here that you don't want to die in a hospital, and that you don't want all that intervention, and that, you know, you don't want unnecessary, unnatural things. So, but when there's the resources and the means and the possibility, then there's the conflicts, and then there's the confusions, and then there's the struggles, and then there's the suffering. And one of the things that we observe is that the more that there's interventions after a certain point, the more complicated the dying can become. Right? So how can we take what we know that serves and then also honor what we also know that we're not paying attention to, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of how can we, I don't know. I mean, I have issue with talking about a good death, because we can never know what a good death is for any particular person. But we're not just talking about the dying person, we're talking about the impact that that is going to have on the loved one.
Right. For me, it's about being really clear about all your options. And you can't be clear about your options if you're not talking about death and preparing for it and talking with your loved ones about it, which is pretty normal. The norm is to just wait and postpone the conversation. And so to me, it's like, if somebody wants to die in a hospital, that's available to them. If they want to die in a nursing home, they've got that covered, you know. But what are some other options that are a little more holistic and communal, if you will, you know? That's
yes,
kind of
yes.
what we're creating or what we're exploring and moving with is that piece, the filling the gap with another offering, another opportunity, another way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. I mean, and I see that also in how we're handling our after death care, mm-hmm. you know, and that we don't need to do away with what now has become the norm, but we also want to make room for the way it was done before and other ways that it can be done now, so that we can just have all the options and not just think about how is that going to benefit me, which is, I think, another part of this movement, which is that we're no longer just thinking, oh, I want that because I want it to benefit me, but to think, I want that because it can benefit me, my loved ones, my community, my land, you know, the environment, and future generations.
Exactly.
Right? A lot of what we're dealing with today is that people before were not really thinking about how, you know, hundreds of years later, this was going to impact us the way it does.
Right. So true. Beautiful.
So is there anything that you would like to share with us in terms of, I mean, I would like to hear so many things, but I know that we'll have more opportunities to explore it more deeply, but is there one thing that, you know, you feel that you could speak to right now of all of the transformations that I'm sure that took place in that journey? One thing, I mean, that is moving you into whatever is next, or I don't know, something of that nature.
You know, what's coming up for me is a film about death. The fact that we are all so excited about sharing a film about death. And as we know, some people come to this film already anxious and uncomfortable, and they come anyway, and some leave midway through, or some afterwards think that was a horrific journey. Majority of people I've seen watch the film are deeply moved. It stirs something inside them. It kind of brings them home in a way. So I think what I'm feeling right now is just this invitation to be with whatever is as you contemplate death, And if it's an aversion, let's look at that aversion. Let's talk about that. That's okay to have fear and anxiety and dread, but looking at that and having the courage to look at that is such an opportunity. So I think, yeah, I'm excited about this film creating opportunities to engage and to have these conversations in this way, in our vulnerability and all of it, it's just, yeah, so it's an honor.
Yes, it really is. And one more thing I'm going to add to what you're saying, which is, yeah, absolutely what has happened, at least in our experience as well. Because, for example, like we do free workshops, we do free lectures at the public library, we open up conversations in different contexts, and we do death cafes, all of these things. But there is something so powerful about immersing oneself in an experience that is close enough and far enough, in a way. It's still on a screen, but it's real, right? And one of our doulas said when we screened the film together to sort of see the possibilities of how we could use it to start conversations and all of these things, she said, it serves the purpose for those who have been, for whatever reason, away from a dying situation, whether it's because they don't have the opportunity or because the situations make them want to not be close to it, whatever the reason. When we don't have any closeness with the true process of dying, all that we believe and assume about dying and death are stories that were told to us, are fictions from movies and horror stories or whatever it is, right? Or just a generalized, you don't want that, it's going to be awful, it's this dark thing that you just want to stay away from. And the moment that we have an experience, that all begins to dissipate and we begin to have our own truth with it. Oh, death can be like this, right? And so what this doula, her name is Asha, said was, up until I had my first experience with death, I just had an imaginary relationship with something that I didn't know. The moment that I am close to it, now it's real for me. And it doesn't mean it's the only way, but it's a way that dissipates a lot of the myths and the suppositions or assumptions about what it could be, and it begins to make it real. And this film does that. Mm-hmm. And it's very powerful for that reason.
It's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that was partly who Ethan was. It's two things. I think Ethan himself was willing to be real and vulnerable and not shy away from anything, even with his major surgery, and he was not hiding it, his scars. Mm-hmm. So powerful for me. And also you have Scott as a brilliant filmmaker who really is willing to go into those vulnerable spaces and not shy away from being with Ethan at the moment of his last breath. Mm-hmm. And it's the most intimate, and yes. And Scott's filmed the birth experience of a home birth. So he's just willing to go there, which mm-hmm. I think the combination was just, it was magical, is magical.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I can't wait for what comes next. And in the meantime, we're connected, we're doing this work together. And I'm so grateful for you and everything you're doing.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much.